All right, guys, welcome back. Okay, I told you we were going to have her on, and we do. We have Emma. She's going to come on today, and she's going to talk to us about blending. We all do it. We all love it, and now we're going to learn from the master. I hate to call you the master, but according to me, you are. So you might not be the master blender where you're at, but in my heart, you are. So everybody, please welcome him, Emma, and I thank you so much for being here. I know it's been kind of a tag back and forth trying to get you get situated, but I'm glad that you're here now.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. No problem. So let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? No, let's not that far back. What kind of got you into the whiskey scene? I guess you could say. And then we'll get into blending and stuff like that. But like, why? I guess why? Why this?
It was really just a fascination with whiskey in general. The first time I tried it, I really liked it. I wasn't a huge beer or wine fan, hadn't really found like a beverage of choice, I guess. And then when I tried whiskey for the first time, I really liked it. And I didn't really know why. It just kind of spoke to me, I guess. And I kind of stepped away for a little bit, and I would order whiskey-based cocktails. But every time I'd go to a bar, I didn't really know what to order, how to order it. And so it wasn't until a little bit later that I really dove into whiskey, met people that were friends that knew way more about it and can kind of teach me about whiskey. And I started trying a lot more than just what your average bar would have on the shelf. And so I started realizing the depth of flavor and variance that there was. And it was just very fascinating to me how scientific and process oriented it was, but then also very community oriented and community building, creative. It just seemed to be able to be all of the things, and I loved that about it. So that kind of it was just like this initial spark of fascination, and then the more I learned about it, the more I just became a nerd with it, and I knew I wanted to kind of like dig deeper with it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that's how a lot of people get started. They're just like, hey, I've heard of whiskey. I know what whiskey is. Let's try some. And most of the time, it's the cheap stuff that you don't you're not really happy about drinking back in the day. But and then you develop a palate, and and now you're a huge Lafroig fan. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's also one of the first whiskeys I really tried where I just thought, holy cow, this is what it can be. Like, this is completely different from any other whiskey I've ever tasted.
Absolutely. That's really funny because like with peated scotches and smoky stuff like that, it's either in the beginning it's either a love-hate relationship. You either love it or you hate it. Not many people jump in there and they're like, oh yeah, and sometimes they can acquire the taste of it, but yeah, to jump into Lafroig right away, that's pretty cool. So okay, where are we? Okay, and then you started working with Crowded Barrel. Is that correct? Or was there a time before Crowded Barrel where you were in the whiskey industry before that?
Yes, but in a very different way. So I took the whiskey sommelier program through Whiskey Marketing School and started doing private tastings just for small groups, parties, events, that sort of thing. And that was my first gig in the industry. Not production based at all. And I really loved it. It was hard I was doing freelance work in a different industry before I started doing that. And freelance in general, very hard. It is maybe not maybe where I shouldn't land because the whole like marketing yourself and like putting yourself out there, trying to find gigs, that was very difficult for me. And so, but that's what I was doing. I had flexibility with my schedule. And so I started doing the private tastings. And there were a lot of people I met through the Whiskey Marketing School who were also doing them, that kind of guided and mentored and just gave tips to everyone on, how to build that kind of business. And so that was my first role in the industry. And then again, because it was freelance, I had a lot of flexibility in my schedule. So I kept just kind of like showing up and volunteering with whiskey marketing school. Crowd a Barrel was beginning to be opening up, and I just kept kind of seeing where I could help out, and eventually they started paying me. So, so from volunteer to hired employee. And started with, they hired me as distillery manager, and I did a little of everything. So I packed merch boxes, kind of kept track of all of the Patreon benefits and communications, did I bartended, I managed our sourced whiskeys, just a little, really just a little of everything. With some good experience, because it definitely was a wide range of like the types of roles you could have in the industry, a lot of different skill sets that I either developed on the job because I had to, or that I already had, but could kind of like develop further and hone in. And so that role really kind of led me down the path of realizing that blending was where my heart lay. And I just really wanted to dive all in on blending and find an opportunity where I could learn more and develop my palate more and just focus on that aspect of the production process.
Right. I mean, because like when you think about Crowd a Barrel in the early days, and even now to this day, that's a small facility, and so like the hand, and you can't afford, a company like that can't afford to have a bottling crew and a labeling crew and all of these things. So you put that hat on each day, and you're like, we're bottling today, okay, cool, And so you just kind of, like you say, you just fill in where you're needed. And with bartending, that's a totally different thing, because like you have to be face to face and very cordial and like outgoing and stuff like that. And when you're more of an introvert that wants to sit over there and nose and smell your whiskey, it's kind of, it makes it more difficult. But at the same time, like you said, it takes you out of your comfort zone and puts you in a place where you're like, oh, this is actually developing me as a person as well, and developing me into it's changing the way that I do other things, because now that I have to talk to people, or, now that I got to meet with the vendors and stuff like that are giving us product, you just kind of learn more and more as you grow. And I guess that's with every job, but in the whiskey community, it's even tighter knit, I feel. I don't know. But okay. So then you, at Crowd a Barrel, then you decided that blending was your thing, correct?
Yeah, so we were making whiskey while sourcing and letting the stuff we were making age and mature. And so I had my hands were kind of in the sourced whiskey, and I was, we'd get barrels in, I would pull samples, set up tastings with staff so we could all go through them. And we also hosted the blending and bottling of the Texas Whiskey Festival blends. And so I kind of like got my first glimpse of blending through that. And then the more we grew and we started with doing single barrel releases. And then we eventually started doing like small micro blends. And I just kind of can be very persistent. I just kind of kept being like, can I help? Can I come join you? Can I see what you're doing? And just kind of kept trying to be involved in that sensory blending space. It was just so fun. And it was fascinating. And again, I think that kind of thread of creativity that blending kind of gives space for really spoke to me. I later the first blend I really worked on was almost an accident, in that it was already blended, but then something went wrong and it had to be reblended. And Daniel just was like, Emma, here, like take this and work on it and like go blend this. I was like, okay, yes, I will definitely do that. And it was a really great learning process. And I really enjoyed doing that. And from then on, I had more and more opportunities to kind of step into that and help out with blending. And I did end up distilling, I think in 2020. Yeah, I think around like late 2020, I started distilling and I really enjoyed that process as well. But it definitely did not speak to me the same way that blending did.
Right.
I hope that answered your question. I feel like I kind of went tangent.
No, that's fine. And because when you find your I'm going to call it a niche in the community, like there's some people that are all about the brewing side of it, like Kyle, who is there now. He's really into the brewing and that stuff. Like, so he geeks out on yeast and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, no, I want to blend them together and make them taste good. You know, that's it. And so everybody has but then the cool thing about in the community, there's a spot for that as well. There's a spot for that person where this is my passion and this is what I feel or you feel that I'm good at. So people have told me I'm good at this. So, hey, let's push me in that direction. And so distilling wasn't it. And so that says a lot when you can be like, this is fun. It's great, but I want to go do this. So where does that lead you after that?
So I was we had more employees at that time. And so people started taking over like the tasting room responsibilities and the Patreon. And so I was distilling and blending and kind of overseeing production and just kind of knew like I wanted to blend. I wanted my career to like start kind of like narrowing down and focusing in on what I really wanted. And once I kind of set my mind to something, I will figure it out when I'm that passionate about it. And I really was passionate about blending. And so I started just like keeping my ears open for opportunities. And I think it was an Instagram post that Balcones had posted just saying like, we're hiring, but they didn't say what roles. And I couldn't find information to see if they were hiring for a blender. And so I just emailed Thomas and Gabe and was like, hey, I don't know if you guys are looking for blending help, but I saw you're hiring and I don't know if you're interested in like contract work or full-time, part-time, but I'm putting my name in that because I just think it'd be an amazing opportunity. And I just kind of like panic wrote the email and just like held my breath and hit send. And just like worst that can happen is they say no.
Absolutely.
And that's that. And I'll keep doing exactly what I'm doing and blend at Crowd a Barrel and distill. And turns out they were looking for help in the blending room. And so it just kind of started the conversation that I had with them. And I feel incredibly lucky and grateful that the timing just worked out the way it did. And I think it definitely helps that I had that working relationship with them where like Crowd a Barrel was sourcing whiskey from Balcones on occasion. They knew me. I emailed back and forth with them. I actually went up there January of 2020 because they used to do these workshops and I wanted to sign up for them, but I hadn't seen the schedule yet. So I reached out and I was like, hey, are y'all doing these this year? And they weren't. And Thomas just said, hey, come on up for a few days anyways. And like, they have some things out on the counter in the blending room and you can just come work with them for a few days and learn. And I'm sure it would be a great experience for all. And I was like, okay, thank you. Yes, please. And so I think that time frame too, like they saw how I worked. They saw me in the blending room with them, kind of doing sensory with them. It wasn't a completely blind hire. And so I was very lucky in that scenario that experience went well and they agreed. So yeah.
But yeah, I could see how, those of y'all who don't know Balcones, they're a huge name in Texas whiskey, and their name is getting out there more and more in the rest of the world. You see them in places in Scotland and stuff like that. So like the outreach of Balcones is pretty large. So they could call on whoever they wanted to come and blend for them. But luckily, timing prayers thrown up, whatever you want to call it. It worked out, and you got shoehorned in there, which is amazing. And so when when you go from blending for 8 barrels or 10 barrels to blending 600 barrels, like, how was there a little bit of a culture shock walking in there your first day?
The volume was definitely a learning curve. Our blends at Balcones can range from since I've been there, as small as 5 barrels to as large as a couple hundred for the final blend size.
Right.
And the sample selection that's out on the counter, that's even larger, obviously. And so it was a huge learning curve to have that many options, that much to go through. I mean, especially with any of our single malt blends, we're sampling every cask and analyzing them. And so, it would take sometimes a couple of weeks to work our way through all of the samples. And it was just overwhelming in that the possibilities were endless. And so I would just be like, Gabe, how do you know when to call it? Like, how do you know when to say it's done? Because it's like, okay, well, the blend seems like it's finished, but we could also do a dozen other things to see what would happen and how it might take it further. And so that was definitely a learning curve that I had to figure out. But it was fun. And now it's so normal to me to have that experience and for it to be that size. And it was a lot of fun. It was very overwhelming, but it was a lot of fun.
I'm sure. So walk us through, I mean, because obviously if you're trying 100+ samples, if you take it too far, your palate's blown, or you have a little too much, and you kind of lose track of what you're doing. How do you safely sample the whiskey to where you're still able to taste it and get all the sensory things, but yet you're not getting intoxicated to the point of like, Lord, I got to go home for the day? Like, how walk us through that a little bit? Because like, I know when I personally do small blending things, maybe 5 bottles or something like that, and trying to, I mean, you're sitting there and you're sampling and you're adding and you're sampling, like within 30 minutes, you might have had, I mean, of course, I probably don't do it correctly, but you might have had 1.5 ounces of a whiskey by the time you're done with it. And you're like, okay, if this was to go on longer, we'd be having a little bit of a problem. So kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. The biggest thing is we spit everything out. So every cask that we sample, we don't like consume any of it, which was the biggest, like, of course they do that. Because otherwise I might not be standing here today or I would have quit a long time ago.
Absolutely.
We want to be healthy humans. Yes. And so I definitely spit everything out. And that, if it's a big blending season, and that's a good portion of the day is doing sensory analysis, it does make me tired. Like, I'll feel it in the afternoon where I just feel tired. And I think it's this combination of like the intense focus and just so much energy is put into analyzing like all of the sensory data that is coming in. And it sounds really weird to put it this way, but I am very introverted, and I get sensory like overload in busy public spaces, festivals, something like that. Like, I'll start feeling that sensory overload. And so sometimes I think of it in that manner, where I feel this like tiredness from such intense focus on outward things and what data I'm taking in. And so I'll try to do all of my sensory in the morning. When I have fresh palate, I drink a lot of water, spit everything out. I take breaks. And so if I'm doing anything that is, we blend and do sensory at bottling strength when we're working on releases. And so if we know what it is, say lineage, it's 47%, we'll proof all the samples down to 47.
Okay.
And I'm able to work through more samples. But if we're doing like grading our single barrel program or doing a new release that we haven't decided the proof yet, and we're looking at these casks at cask strength, I don't go nearly as far with how many samples we can analyze. And so I just take breaks, and I'll break it up with maybe some email, or maybe I have like a 20-minute meeting in the day that kind of breaks up that time. And if I'm really needing it, sometimes I'll like munch on some cashews or something, or like plain crackers, something very light, drink a lot of water, take a break. And usually I can come back, but every now and then, or like I'll start noticing when samples don't seem that different anymore. I'm like, okay, my palate's tired. Like, I'm not picking up the nuance anymore. I'm not picking up the subtleties. This all just tastes like the same kind of thread going through and nothing much else. And then I'm like, okay, I need to come back and do this again tomorrow. And that's where I'll start the next day. It gets intense. Drinking a lot of water and spitting everything out are the main two things that just like make it possible. I feel like.
Right. Absolutely. Because I mean, like you say, doing less because it's more cask strength. That just makes sense. But like, yeah. And then you're like, I'm guessing you're writing down, your tasting notes or your smelling notes and stuff like that as well. So then you do have a little, it's not like you're going, just smelling everything in a row. You're actually taking the time with each sample to give it its fair shake, to be like, this one isn't an exquisite barrel. Maybe it doesn't need to go in the blend. We need to have it as a single barrel or something like that. Or this one is not good. We need to blend this one out pretty, But anyway, it's like, I can see how like you would get fatigued, and then your tasting notes are like caramel, vanilla, you're like, yes, they all have that. Like, yeah, but I can totally understand how you just get fatigued, and then it's your job. So guess what? You got to do it again tomorrow. So you gotta do. I mean, everybody's probably like, oh, that's such a hard job. You got to drink whiskey all day. But at the same time, like every job turns into a job a little bit sometimes when you're like, I'm just not feeling it today. So it's really good that you get to take breaks and stuff like that, though, because that could get overwhelming really fast.
Yeah. I'll take my time. Like I'll drink some water between every sample, and I'll take my time, like, rinsing out my glass and getting the next card out to take notes and like writing down the barrel number. And I just, I'm not like in a rush, because I know that little bit of time between each sample is just going to like give my palate time to breathe for a second.
Right. And what about like, like everybody in the community talks about like finding your zero. What, like you said something about the crackers and stuff like that, or smelling the, the crick of your arm or something like that. Is there any special things that y'all do there? They said, drinking or smelling coffee as well. Is there any special things that y'all do at Balcones where it kind of resets you back to zero?
I definitely smell my arm too, all the time. And I think one thing that we will do is anytime we're working on an existing release, we pull out all of our references. And so we'll pull out at least like 3 previous batches just to kind of get the big picture view of, okay, what has a lineage looked like the last 3 times we blended it? And we'll kind of think about like, which one is our favorite and why? And we'll make notes on, the common thread through them all that is lineage, but then also like, how are these different? Because we do, we're craft distillery. We're one of the larger ones, but it's very hands-on. It's our warehouse has really evolved over the years and how we've filled casks and what we've filled. And so, depending on what barrels we have to look at in any given season, it could be slightly different. Maybe one year it's slightly more dense, or maybe one year there's like this little floral flutter that's in there a little stronger than usual. And so I think that process kind of just like brings me back. And admits when I start getting lost in the weeds of all the different individual cask samples, it's like, okay, just go back to your reference.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
that tends to help a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, let's talk about flavor drift a little bit. I don't know if this is, you know, in your wheelhouse or not. I'm sure it is, because each batch, although you're trying to blend it to the batch that was the year before, barrels are persnickety and they're going to do what they want to do, and they might not present the right profile that you're wanting, no matter how you blend it. So, and obviously you try and get as close as possible, but it's okay. Like, Jack Daniels is Jack Daniels today. It was 100 years ago. But I feel like with bourbon, and tell me if I'm wrong here, I feel like with bourbon, it's easier to hit that profile because it is so dense in the 5 flavors that it has. Whereas when you're working with a single malt or something like that, the flavors get they're a lot broader in that, so you have more to work with. Is that right?
I feel similarly. I think so. The way that we fill rye, we have a lot, even just being able to use used oak with single malt versus not with rye and bourbon. We have a lot more consistency in our rye casks, for example, because we fill them into the same type of oak within, 1, maybe 2 toast and char profiles. And we get I apologize, my cat is about to make an appearance because she just can't help herself.
Okay.
This is Angel. This is my baby girl. And so it is like, I find that there's a lot more consistency in larger numbers with rye and bourbon, just my experience.
Right.
I'm sure people, have had varying experiences with that. And with our malt, especially, again, I'm just going to keep talking about lineage because
it's fine.
I love it so much, but
it's amazing.
We blend that using both Texas grown barley, 100% single malt, and Scottish barley, 100% single malt. And those 2 mash bills are put into multiple types of barrel profiles, whether it's American oak or European oak. We reuse our own casks, so we might have our own ex malt casks or ex, maybe it previously held our corn whiskey or it previously held our bourbon, or we also bring in used Kentucky bourbon casks. So we have so many pieces that kind of build this larger kind of picture. And depending, to your point, if we're filling our own casks, well, for the barrels we're looking at that are of age, what barrels did we have available at that time? Well, we just dumped some bourbon, or we had just dumped some single malt. So let's refill those. And, that can end up making the lineage profile. And I think the last couple of years, we really narrowed down like what, I guess there's a little bit more narrow of a picture of what we fill and why. And we're putting this into this kind of barrel, and it's going to become this in the future. And, I think a lot of young distilleries, you're kind of figuring it out, and you're figuring out your warehouse and your profiles and what helps you and what doesn't help you. And you start making decisions and cutting out options that just aren't, you notice over the years they're not giving you what you want or what you need. And so, again, I love talking about whiskey, so I feel like I just keep going on and on.
It's fine. I love it. I love it because, because when you're a younger distillery, and you guys are one of the first ones to be out there, but at the same time, Texas whiskey in itself isn't that old. So, you don't have the background like let's say a Jim Beam, where they've been doing this for 100 years. You don't have the background of like, I know this flavor profile on this barrel at 6 years old is going to taste like this. It's consistent because we have written record of it. You don't have the written record of it. And you guys are constantly developing new blends and new lineup and stuff like that. So it's like, you don't really know, like, what is this going to taste like in 10 years? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to taste like. I mean, it could be crap. Who knows? You know, it's not crap, guys. I promise it's not. But at the same time, like, you guys are charting new territory with it. And you're like, we don't know what this cask is going to do, or how it's going to play with, like you say, with the lineage, with the two different types of malt. Now, do you, and if you can't talk about this, that's fine. Do you age them separately, like the Texas grown and you're blending? Okay, so that in itself is going to present a widely different profile, because the barley is different. Unfortunately, it's not all, commercial. I mean, you're going to get what you get when it comes to barley. It's not like corn. Corn is a lot more forgiving, I feel, is a lot more forgiving in its profile because it doesn't have a whole lot there. It's mainly just a sugar source for the yeast to eat. Now, once you start getting into blue corn and stuff like that, then you get some flavor. But, okay, so let's talk about blending. Let's take us through a blending thing, because one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was when we did Psalm 3, you were gracious enough to come down and teach us about blending. Now, I don't want you to go through that profile, because obviously I want people to go take the class and learn how to do it, but kind of give us a crash course in it, if you will. That way, if you aren't blending at home, why aren't you? But those who are blending at home, they can kind of understand, because a lot of times when I'm blending, and now that I know this, you're blending too much and it just falls apart and it just tastes like crap. So kind of walk us through that, if you can.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep this to a more broader, not necessarily distillery based focus, because I love that people are blending at home. I've definitely done it and still do it. And when I approach blending from that kind of mindset, which could just be this like idea of creation, like you're just looking at samples and you might have an idea of what you want, but you're not just trying to repeat something that's already happened. You're not trying to repeat a release. And so I think always starting with this picture and a willingness to, it's going to sound super cheesy, just kind of like, what is the whiskey telling you? Like this idea of a picture of what you want, but then being willing to see what the whiskey wants to be instead, maybe, or, maybe it shifts in a direction you wouldn't have expected. I won't go into too much detail about what I talk about in the class, but the biggest part from that, as far as like how to start blending, is there isn't really a right or wrong way. That's my biggest, like, do not let, there might be ways that are more beneficial or might get you there faster or might work for you and not for someone else, but there's not really a right way or a wrong way to do it. A way that helps me is to think about it in parts. And this is a very common approach where you just kind of like think about your base and that broad kind of base flavor profile that's going to kind of make the meat of the blend. For me, that's typically something that's lighter. It's going to not be your finishes or your smoky whiskeys, or, unless that's what you're going for. It's just like a smoke bomb. But just starting with that base to kind of bring a round palate. I've used Irish whiskeys for this. Kind of like lighter malts, or if I'm going for a more, I don't often, when I do stuff at home, I'm usually playing with like scotches and Irish whiskeys or American single malts. I'm not typically doing it with bourbons, but could probably use like a lighter bourbon that's a little lower ABV. And then bringing in that second layer that's going to have a little more depth and bring a little more body to it. Maybe you'll get more texture here, you'll get a little more of kind of like, again, it just depends what kind of flavor profile you're going for. But for me, I think like this is where I might bring in darker fruit notes or like a richer kind of heavier character to it. If I want there to be a little spice, maybe I'll throw in something that has a little like candied ginger or just like something that's a little more sprightly. And then that like final just like sprinkling of something could be where I might like, okay, here's a sherry bomb that I'm just gonna like just a little bit, and it just kind of like fills it out. Or, you know, that's where you add your smoke to get the smoke character where you want it. Or it's just like an accent. You don't need a lot of it. But it definitely, you know, just remembering there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. And don't try to cover all parts all at once and think about like, okay, I need to pick the bottles for my shelf right now that I'm going to use. You could just pick one and start there and then think, okay, like what will complement this? And then you add to it, and you just, as you go, see what you might need rather than going into it thinking like, I have to use these. And again, even as I say that, to the contrary, it also helps to put constraints on yourself. So really, there is no wrong or right way to do this. There are so many ways to go about it, because sometimes it is fun to just be like, okay, I have these 3 options and I must make a good blend from it. That's also a fun challenge sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, yeah, putting constraints on yourself helps. When I teach for the whiskey level 3, and I do this blending workshop, I created a blend. Well, I created a blend for the class. I won't say why, but I created a blend, and because the class focuses on UK whiskey, and, you know, you learn the history of Scotch and Irish whiskey. That's the focus of the blind tastings. My constraint that I gave myself was I had to blend with Scotch and Irish whiskey. And so that, you know, when I walked into the whiskey vault to start working on this blend, it is incredibly overwhelming. I was like, I cannot do this and with this many whiskeys. And so, you know, just created the constraint. Still very overwhelming with how many options they have.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, that definitely helped kind of narrow it down a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of people that are also doing, you know, like infinity bottles. And now those are different because most of the time they're taking 2 ounces, pouring it in there of every, you know, of like they have a bourbon one or a Scotch one, and they'll just kind of add 2. The issue with those, I feel, is you tell yourself on the bottle, or I've seen this, it says, don't drink till here. Well, if you don't sample it, how do you know it's good? And then you wasted an entire bottle of whiskey that fell apart or is way too spicy or, you know, whatever. Like the other thing with the blending, and you can go into this as well, is you have to constantly be tasting the blend to see if it's, and do it in such a small amount to where like you don't ruin an entire batch. If you ruin it, you ruin, you know, half an ounce of it, not 20 gallons of it. So the kind of walk us through that, like how, I don't know how to say it the right way, like the scale. I guess this goes back to Balcones, like the scale of it, like you're doing the blends in small quantities, right? Right. So it's a lot easier. Like if you mess up the entire blend by putting something too much of one thing or whatever, you're able to save it rather than doing it in the barrel or whatever. So that to me is really kind of interesting. That and so like at home when you're doing that as well, use the little pipettes and just get like drips of stuff. But anyway, we get, so one of the other questions I wanted to ask about all of this was, being that your job is to blend whiskey, do you ever, like, how do I say it? Do you still have love for whiskey, right? Mm-hmm. Like, do you ever go home and be like, I need a whiskey after being in whiskey all day?
I definitely still enjoy whiskey. Okay. And it is my beverage of choice. I think, you know, I've met a lot of people who they're in the industry, and when they go home, they're drinking a beer or a glass of wine, or if they're going out with friends, they order a cocktail, or like they don't want to just sip on whiskey, which is understandable.
Right.
And I think it's just as a part of, who I am and my personality type is if I didn't love it, I couldn't do it.
Right.
And I still feel like a Balcones fangirl and just feel really lucky that I'm there blending for them. I love the whiskey that we make. I think we have a fantastic team of distillers and brewers who are making phenomenal whiskey that I get to work with. And so I do, like, if I'm choosing to have a drink, I will choose whiskey like 9 times out of 10. If I don't, then I'm probably picking a margarita or another, like another kind of like light cocktail. I don't get very creative in my own cocktail making, but I enjoy trying cocktails at restaurants, bars. But I think, I really do love all of the flavors and textures and smells, and maybe because I am a very introverted person and I live in my head a lot of the time, maybe it is just something that just kind of it either connects me to what's in my head, like it connects me to memories or experiences or things that I love, or the sensory experience of it just like brings me out of my head and into this glass and into this world of flavor and aroma. And I'm a nerd. I love whiskey and I like to drink it when I can. And healthy humans here like
Absolutely.
sips. And I think I'm grateful for that, because I really do think if it got to a point when it was just so much with the job that I just don't know that I could keep doing it.
Yeah.
That's just the way I work. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have the passion for it. And if it becomes a stumbling block as well, that's not a good thing either. You want to make sure that I mean, most people want to love their job, and if loving your job means I get to drink whiskey, that makes it even better. But at the same time, okay, so switching gears a little bit, because I just thought of this, and if I don't say it, it'll be gone to the ether forever. So when you're doing, and I know your tasting notes when you're doing a blend are more than likely your own, unless they get put on the back of the bottle or whatever. But like, obviously in tasting, we want to be as descriptive as possible. Like, don't just say stone fruit. What type of stone fruit? Do you get that descriptive when you do tasting? When you do a blending, do you get that descriptive with every glass, or is there some that are just like, this just tastes like crap or whatever? Like, do you do that?
I do multiple things.
Okay.
Most of the time, I think I'm very descriptive because I think that's the way I learned, and that's kind of like the way I trained my palate and whatnot. But I also have, I think it depends on the purpose, and I also kind of like just go through different phases of thinking about how I do sensory differently, and is there something that someone else is doing that I want to try just to experiment and see if it helps me and my palate. I try to be as descriptive as possible most of the time because it helps me remember more clearly. And so, saying peach instead of stone fruit, or saying it's like a grilled peach versus fresh, or peach candy rings. I try to be specific, and I think as I've, when I first joined Balcones, it was a whole new group of people that I was doing sensory with that had a different vocabulary than I did. And so I started learning new ways of thinking about the whiskey and new ways of talking about it that I hadn't heard before. And that's why there's so much value in like tasting whiskey with people and talking about it, because you kind of get that conversation going and that experience, and you learn new ways to look at it. And there are some moments when I have a lot of samples in front of me and I'm just doing this initial grading of like, I need to know what to bring forward as a candidate for the blend and what to just push back. And, you know, I'll almost like, this might sound horrible, but like I'll deal with it later. Like we'll sample everything, but if I know I'm not going to use it in the blend, it's like, okay, when we're done with the blend, then I'll come back and see what it needs or see where it needs to go. And so that initial kind of grading, when I'm in that mode, it is much more like instinctual. Like, what is my gut telling me? Yep, nope, yep, yes, no, you know, and I will just kind of like do it faster in that way, just to kind of get this initial impression of what's on the counter or what's in front of me. And then I will go and be more specific, especially if it's a no. I want to know why, because if it needs mitigation, if we need to transfer it out of that barrel, if it needs to have water, if, you know, if that proof needs to drop down a little bit because it's too spicy and prickly, like, you know, we don't want to ignore those things. And so there's always like this step of going back, but there are definitely moments of kind of like a quick gut instinct. Where is this? Does it fit? Yes or no? But usually when I do that, it creates more work for myself, because then I do end up going back and wanting to get more specific and see why. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but yeah, it's a little all over the place. More often, I'm very detailed in the notes that I take. And we'll comment on, you know, the aromas, the flavors, the textures, the feel. You know, we'll talk about like what the experience is like to sip the whiskey. You know, what is the finish like? Where does it hit on the palate? Where is it lacking on the palate? All those things, you know. And so there are like different methods for different purposes, I guess.
Right. That's really cool. Because like, okay, one other little question. Is there ever and like a barrel that is just not good? Like you're like, wow, that is not great. We need to figure out what we need to do with that, because like I don't think you can fix that. Is there an unfixable barrel, or is there something that just maybe you eventually can blend it out?
It could be that I haven't been there long enough, but I don't know that I've found something that's just unfixable. Because there are a few things that we would try before we would make that call, and that just all takes time. Because then you have to give it like, you got to give it a good, at least, you know, a couple full seasons to really see what the impact would be. Because, and you know, with malt being able to not be restricted to just new oak, there's so much flexibility in what you can do. And so, you know, we'll add water in cask to lower the ABV in barrel. We will transfer it into a different cask. We'll marry barrels together and then either refill into the same casks or transfer into something else. Like there are so many different things that we can do. There's a lot we would try before we just call it. They might, you know, Jared or Gabe might say otherwise if they've come across something.
Right. And well, and the thing is, it's like, I don't know, you know, if this makes sense or not, but like you are not on a timeline, but you're kind of like, how long do you spend with it? You know, like how long do you put if it's just like, well, let's marry it. We'll put it in a different cask, and I'll see you in 6 months, you know, and then we'll talk about it. Like you're trying to get a blend out, which, like you say, it can take weeks to do. But like if you just keep going back to the, you know, like you keep pointing out the bad kid in school, like, you know, just be like, hey, you go sit in detention for a little bit, and I'll deal with you when I can. So let's move to your blend. Is there a blend at Balcones that you specifically did, and one that you were able to like perfect?
There are definitely blends that I've had a big hand in. Everything is so collaborative. And
Okay.
so we usually always have more than one palette on something just because that's the way we like to work.
Right.
We don't want Balcones to be one person or one blender's palette. And so everything is, when it comes to core, Gabe and I are doing the majority of that blending. And then Jared is always in on all of the special releases.
Okay.
There was one, I think, because, and again, this is very unusual just because that's not how we work. But the peated release of 2022, I blended that one, and it was completely not on purpose. I mean, it was, but it was, Gabe was out of town, and so it was going to be me and Jared, but then he got sick or something. Like, I can't remember why, but like Jared was out, and so but it needed to be done.
Right.
And we were coming up on like, no, we can't wait. Like, this blend needs to be done. And so I started blending it, and then I think at some point, I don't know if he saw it this way or if he would say differently. But it seemed like Jared was just kind of having fun with this idea of just like watching me like I was panicking on the inside. Like, don't let the sun. And so he just told me to just go for it and just blend. And so I did, and I brought samples to him and had him try different stages. And each time I just remember thinking, like, you're not telling me what to do next. You're not telling me where to go from here. And so there's a lot of like internal panic happening. Absolutely. But it was very nice. I loved that process. I really loved the time I got with Jared and just talking with him about the different stages. And he, I should know better, but by that point, but he reminded me, like, pull out your references. And so I pulled out every single peated release that they had done, and we just sampled through them. And so even that wasn't entirely just me, because he definitely, in our conversations, like, guided how I thought about it or pointed out something, that I wasn't tasting that was there. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was 100% me because I had that assistance, but it was definitely my first, like, you're doing a lot of this on your own, kid. I was like, okay.
Okay. But it seems like to me from what you're saying that like it's just a huge family, like a huge family of people. Just like, hey, if you're having an issue with this, come to me and let's talk about this blend, or let's talk about how it's not working out, or how this is turning out amazing, or whatever. And you guys just kind of keep it like that. And it's really cool that like you're like, man, I'm not getting much on this one, or whatever. You can kind of like ping pong it back and forth with each other. That to me is really cool. Yeah.
I love that so much about Balcones in general. Like, that's one of my favorite parts about working there is there are just no egos. They're so kind and generous and just want to do it together.
Right.
And almost like fight to be able to do it together, like waiting for someone to get back in town, or, I think someone maybe Gabe brought a sample to Jared's house once, or vice versa, because he was sick or something, and just like left it on his porch, or, just want everyone to be involved. And when we were blending Cataleja last year, there are just differing, preferences on like the level of sherry impact and the level of that kind of funky sulfur, like mushroomy kind of flavor profile you can get from really heavily sherried whiskeys. And it wasn't a like, oh, well, this is what it's going to be. It was a conversation of like, we want everyone to enjoy what we're creating together. So where's the balance? And
Right.
it was very collaborative that way. And I love it so much. I don't think I expected it to not be that, but I
Right.
don't think I expected the level of like how seriously they take that and that attention to include all of the blenders and like include all of the palettes.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, because it can turn into like a this is you, this is me, you know, do your job type thing. Instead, it's more like, hey, let's all work through this together. So, in that retrospect, do you ever get to do anything other than blending there? Have you ever ran the still or anything like that over there?
I have run the stills,
Awesome.
not on my own.
Right.
There was an intention when I started to have me cross train in a lot of different departments, just so I really had an idea of what the whole picture of Balcones is. And I didn't know this then, I know it now, but I was the first person they had hired that came from another distillery. And so they had never hired someone from a distillery before. And so maybe there was a sense of like, we want her to see, we're not sure of her whole experience and background. So we want to see where it's similar or different. Maybe there was some of that to that, but it was just so busy. And so they needed my help because everyone was so busy. Right. And so I cross-trained in the still house for a couple weeks.
Oh, wow.
And learned the way they do the distillate, they split it up into 2 different shifts. And so I did both shifts for like a week and trained. It was so overwhelming because they're learning 4 stills at the same time. And I had so many timers just like, what is that going off? And that means you check this thing on that still, and this one's going off, and you need to look for the heads cut. And it was very overwhelming, but it was really informative, and it was nice, getting to know the distillers more too. And they kept me distilling like once a month. They would bring me back into still house to kind of like remember and not forget. I think also like if someone went on vacation, it was like, okay, Emma can help kind of come in, but things just get busy and grow. And it just got to a point. I don't think I've been in the still house for at least like a year and a half, maybe.
Oh, wow.
I did it for maybe like a year where I was like once a month they'd throw me in on a shift, just to like, keep the not even muscle memory, because I was always using the sheets telling me what to do. Like, okay, so this is how you turn this thing on. It was it definitely gave me a lot of respect for our distillers and everything that they're managing at once. But that was really the only, I think I've spent like a day or two in warehouse, helping pull samples, move some barrels around, but nothing too intense.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you haven't worked with the marketing team at all, going to different places and selling the wares?
You know what? Sometimes I do brand stuff, I guess. I don't always consider that like a different role, but I guess you could consider it that. I go to shows and festivals sometimes.
Right. Yeah, that's like the fun part, because you get to see other people like, hey, try this. Okay, so of the blends that you've done recently, which one was your favorite?
Of the recent ones, Mirador Eclipse just came out at the beginning of this month, beginning of April. Right. And I love it so much. Okay. I loved the blending process. I loved the teamwork involved. I love the whiskey itself. All of the pieces around it just came together for me. And so that is definitely, yeah, one of my
So
like,
what makes it different than the regular Mirador?
yeah, so it's a great question. So Mirador Eclipse this year, in the past we had done a rye whiskey called Eclipse, and it just went to Europe. It wasn't distributed in Texas or the US or anything. And we had pitched a different yeast with our traditional yeast. And so it was kind of this idea of these two opposing forces kind of coming together, in this one picture. And with the eclipse that just passed through Texas, we had, it was just kind of like the perfect, all of these pieces came into line. So we had done something similar with malt. And so Mirador Eclipse is, we took our classic Mirador profile. So there's, Golden Promise Scottish barley aged in used oak. And we co-pitched our traditional yeast that we use with two different wine yeasts. Okay. And so we used a red wine yeast and a rosé wine yeast. Oh, wow. And we co-pitched them with our traditional one, but separately. So we had different casks aging one of the co-pitches, and then another set of casks aging the other, the other co-pitch. And we blended those barrels together to create Mirador Eclipse. And it is so fruit forward in a completely different way than our barrels typically present. Okay. And so there's a very like blush, berry forward, kind of like raspberry cream note to it. And it's very lovely. And it's the kind of flavor profile that I personally just enjoy. Right. And so that kind of like light fruit. And anytime you get like a raspberry, strawberry kind of flavor note, I'm all in.
Absolutely. That's good stuff right there.
It's a lovely blend. And it was a lot of fun to work on. And it was a very collaborative one. We had 4 different people at least contributing to the grading of casks. Oh, wow. We had different people try it and give feedback at the different stages of the blend. It was just a very fun process. And so that one is at the distillery right now, and it, I believe, is hitting distribution like late April to May. Okay. And is going to several states, more than Cataleja did. I think Cataleja went to 6, and this is branching out a little bit further.
Okay. I was just fixing to ask you, how do I get me a bottle? But it'll be coming soon, unless I run to Waco. I was just close by there this past weekend. We have family who live around Temple, Killeen area, and went and visited them, but we didn't go to Waco. We didn't go up that high. But yeah, that's super cool. That sounds really interesting. And I love the fact that you guys, even though you are a larger craft distillery, you're still willing to take what I would consider a risk to co-pitch the yeast. Obviously, you guys have done your research. You know what you're doing. This is an old hat by now. But like the fact that you were able to do that and still have that versatility of being able to say, hey, let's see what happens when we do this, and it turned out amazing. That's pretty cool that you have the freelance part of it, to where you can just kind of do what you need to do to make it work. That to me is super cool. I applaud you guys for being able to do that, and not just sticking to your like, here's my core range coming out again, which the core range is lovely. Don't get me wrong, but like when you get to try something a little different, that's when you show the unique blending and the unique profile that is Balcones, I feel, because I always seek after the special releases, which everybody does. Where, I'm not calling myself a tater hunter, but like, at the same time, I want to have that special release because, I can go get the single malt at the store all day, every day. I want the single malt that's a single barrel at 68% alcohol. I want to have that so that I can be like, whoa, this is crazy. So yeah, no, it's really cool. Y'all get to have that freedom to just kind of branch out like that.
Thank you. There's definitely a lot of curiosity within that space at Balcones. So
yeah,
there are a lot of interesting things in the warehouse.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, and then I'll let you go. I'm not going to keep you all day. Let's talk a little bit about, I know that you love Laphroaig and all of those things. What is the whiskey that you're turning more to besides the Mirador Eclipse that you're turning more to these days that is really opening up to you?
I have actually been gravitating towards Compass Box a lot lately in the last few months, really for the last maybe year and a half. I've always enjoyed Compass Box releases, but I love one thing about my previous job that I do miss still was the Alliance series and doing the blends with different producers liquid. And so I really enjoy seeing how Compass Box is creating these luxury, complex blends. I love that they share what producers they're getting whiskey from. They'll break it down to the percentage of barrel type, and I've really been enjoying just kind of like diving into those and seeing how much variety there is to their expressions, and just kind of like I have so much respect for what they're doing, and they're just doing such a phenomenal job, and they're so beautiful, like delicate but complex whiskeys. Even like Peat Monster is, again, this is probably this is coming from the woman who is obsessed with Laphroaig. So, hear this with maybe a grain of salt. But like even Peat Monster is this like kind of very approachable take on peat. And so it could be a great way to introduce someone to peated whiskey to see if they might like that kind of flavor profile. And so I definitely, I am a firm believer in sampling whiskey from as many different producers as you can, especially blending, especially being in the industry. I don't want to get in a space where all I'm tasting is Balcones.
Right.
That's not going to help me, and it's not going to help Balcones.
No, it's not.
So, continuing to try to develop my palate by trying other whiskeys from, craft producers, big producers, expensive whiskeys, cheap whiskeys, like, smaller, large, whatever, all styles. I just try to explore as much as I can. And I think that is really valuable for everyone. I think everyone should do that if they like whiskey and they like drinking whiskey. And especially if you are like wanting to blend and you're blending at home, just try everything you can. If you're at a bar and they do they don't always do quarter ounce pours or half ounce pours, but I always recommend ordering a small sample size and trying more things rather than getting a double of one thing. You can just try a couple small pours of different whiskeys you've never tried, because you don't always want to drop the money on a full bottle if you've never tried it before. Absolutely. And then you'll have more options in the future for at home to blend with. But I also just think it develops your palate. You discover new things. So I've definitely been looking over my shoulder because my Compass Box is over there. But I've definitely been enjoying Compass Box. I love their artist blend as just I just want to sip on a whiskey and it be kind of like lighter and friendly and it's not too expensive compared to their other releases. But I was gifted a bottle of Menagerie a couple Christmases ago, and I love that one so much. It's one of my favorites.
Absolutely. Well, another one, and I'm sure you're all into these guys too, is Lost Lantern, right? Lost Lantern is I just had them on, and they, every release they do a blend as well. And the one they released with this new one was their Midwest series, was the Far Flung Rye. And they blended a bunch of rye whiskeys together. And it is, I mean, if you're into the rye profile, I know rye to some people is kind of like peat. They just don't want to dip into it. But the rye profile that they produced and blended with these, they had parameters. It had to be these distilleries. It is so great. Like, it is such a little darker, a little more rich than the Compass Box. But again, with the transparency and the stuff like that, and it's amazing what all of these companies are doing to showcase the whiskey for what it is. That to me is really cool.
They are doing such a phenomenal job. Their palettes are just like very finely tuned in. They have done the work. They have put in the work to make these connections and visit these distilleries, know what they have, as options in front of them. They know what they like, and they are making some really amazing blends and just choosing really great, single casks to release. But I'm a huge fan of Adam and Nora, and I think I want the world to sing their praises.
Absolutely.
And they are.
and they will. They will. They're getting more and more out there. Awesome. Anyway, okay. One last thing, and then I will let you go, and we can go from there. But do you still, even though you have to drink it all day, do you still come home and have a Balcones as well?
I do.
Okay.
I really love Balcones whiskey, and I have a lot of it at home. Perks of working there, I guess. We get a great discount.
That's true.
And I definitely sip on whiskey. Balcones whiskey at home still.
Okay. I mean, that's the thing. Like, when you work for a brand that you love, you kind of get like, oh man, I don't want to try it too much because I still want to have that mystique of loving it and all of the things. So it's nice to. And how long have you been with them?
It's been, I think, around 2.5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, I started December 1st of 2021.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, I don't know if you want everybody to know your socials or anything, but if you want to give those, you're more than welcome. And then stick on. I want to talk to you after, but yeah. And then I really appreciate you coming on here and talking with me. And it's really been a great time, and I appreciate the time that you gave.
I appreciate you having me on. We had a lovely chat, and it was nice catching up with you. And thank you for asking really great questions.
No problem. That's kind of my job. But anyway. All right. Well, I appreciate you being on here. And yeah, until next time, guys, keep your spirits up.